Hey guys, tonight we're not journeying to the moon or sailing the high seas. Instead, we're going to walk a different path, one you probably wouldn't want to walk in real life. Tonight, we're stepping back, way back to a time when a sneeze could be a death sentence, and a fever wasn't just a sign to stay home with soup. We're going to explore the horrifying, and I mean truly horrifying, diseases of the ancient world. Trust me, if you were to somehow go back in time, not only would you not be able to charge your phone, you probably wouldn't survive past your first mosquito bite. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 430 BCE, and the city of Athens hums with a vibrant, restless energy. You can almost feel the dust of the Nix, the hill where you and thousands of other citizens would gather to debate the fate of the city. The air is thick with the scent of olive oil and baked bread, mingled with the salty spray from the nearby Aegean Sea. You're here in the heart of the Golden Age, a time of unprecedented art, philosophy, and democracy. Pericles, the great orator and statesman, is leading the city, and the Parthenon, that magnificent marble temple, is still new, its white stone gleaming in the Attic sun. But there's a tension in the air, not just from the ongoing Peloponnesian War with Sparta, which has forced many country folk to crowd inside the city walls, but from something far more insidious. A rumor. A whisper like a chill that runs down your spine even on the warmest day. It's a sickness, they say, and it's spreading. You first hear about it in the bustling agora, the city's central marketplace. One minute you're haggling over the price of a clay amphora, and the next you're pulled into a hushed conversation with a friend. His brother, a soldier just returned from the northern city of Piraeus, has fallen ill. It's not the kind of illness you've seen before. The symptoms are strange, a sudden violent fever that scorches the body. You hear stories of uncontrollable vomiting, of a fierce thirst that no amount of water can quench. It's a fever so intense it feels like fire coursing through your veins, and your friend's face is pale with worry. He doesn't know what to do, what to believe. You try to offer words of comfort, but a knot of dread tightens in your stomach. This is something new, something alien. The usual remedies, herbs, and prayers seem useless against it. You walk through the crowded streets, the air thick with the smell of sweat and fear. People who were lively and boisterous just a few days ago now move with a sluggish, terrified slowness. The chatter has died down, replaced by a low, mournful hum of coughing and weeping. You see a man clutching his head, his skin mottled with an angry rash. He collapses in the street, his eyes rolling back in his head, and no one dares to help. They just sidestep his body, their faces a mask of fear. You can almost hear the panic, building a low-frequency vibration that hums just beneath the surface of the city's usual rhythm. It's like the world has been switched from color to black and white, all the vibrancy drained away by an invisible force. It's a surreal and terrifying experience. The fear is palpable, and it's almost as contagious as the disease itself. This sickness, which history will later call the Plague of Athens, is not the bubonic plague you might be picturing. Unlike the Black Death, which came centuries later, this disease had a different set of symptoms. Thucydides, the great historian and chronicler of the war, described it in grim detail. He wrote about a fiery sensation in the head, a redness of the eyes, and a sore throat. Then came the violent sneezing and coughing, a rasping sound that echoed through the narrow streets. The body would become covered in pustules and sores, and a fierce, unquenchable thirst would drive people to madness. Can you imagine that, being so thirsty that you'd literally throw yourself into a well, only to have the cold water do nothing to soothe the fiery torment within your body? It's the kind of thing that makes you feel lucky to have a water filter in your refrigerator. This pestilence seemed to strike without mercy, affecting both the strong and the weak, the rich and the poor. It made no distinction. You hear of entire families wiped out in a matter of days. A family you knew, a potter and his wife, both strong, healthy people, are gone. You saw them just a week ago. They were laughing. Now their house stands silent and empty, a ghostly shell. The disease didn't just kill, It killed in a particularly brutal way, and the survivors, if they existed, were often left with permanent disfigurement or memory loss. The historical record suggests that the disease left a profound mark on the survivors, and not just the physical kind. The terror and despair of the plague changed people. Some became reckless living for the day, believing that life was short and nothing mattered. Others became more pious, more religious, clinging to any hope they could find. As you navigate the ever-shrinking world of your daily life, you start to notice the strange, almost comical ways people try to cope. The more superstitious citizens, those who believe the plague is a divine punishment, start wearing amulets and charms. You see people with strange concoctions tied to their wrists claiming it will ward off the sickness. One man is carrying around a live bat, believing its screech will scare away the evil spirits of the plague. It's a desperate and sad attempt to find meaning in something so meaningless, so random. You can almost see the irony, the sheer futility of it all. They're trying to outsmart a microscopic killer with a fuzzy mammal and a piece of braided string. Bless their hearts. The common historical fact is that during this time, the city's democracy for a brief period was essentially put on hold. The social and political order began to unravel as the institutions of the city crumbled under the weight of death and despair. With the fear of contagion, people stopped visiting the sick, and many bodies were left unburied, which only accelerated the spread. The sheer scale of the death is hard to wrap your mind around. The city's cemeteries are full, and you see pyres burning constantly on the outskirts of town. The smoke a thick, acrid haze against the blue attic sky. Bodies are being piled on top of each other in whatever open space can be found. It's a scene of organized chaos and utter devastation. The laws that govern proper burial, an essential part of Athenian society, are ignored. It's an unspoken agreement among the living that you can't worry about the dead when the living are in so much peril. The stench is everywhere, a sickening, sweet odor that you can't escape. It clings to your clothes and to your skin. The sheer volume of death is almost impossible to comprehend. One little-known detail from the accounts of Thucydides is that the disease was not only highly contagious, but it also affected animals. He wrote about how birds and dogs that fed on the unburied bodies would die too. It paints an even more desolate picture of a city under siege where the very scavengers of the streets were also falling victim. Imagine a dog you might have petted yesterday is now just another silent victim on a street corner, a small, furry monument to the plague's unsparing reach. It makes the world feel even smaller, even more inescapable. The plague didn't just target humans, it was a blight on the entire natural world of the city. The plague raged on for years, coming in waves. It struck a devastating blow to the city's population and military strength. The war with Sparta, which was already a brutal conflict, was made 1,000 times worse by this new invisible enemy. Pericles, the leader of the city, fell victim to the plague himself, a staggering loss that plunged Athens into even deeper despair. The city was left leaderless and crippled. The people's trust in their gods and their own intelligence was shaken to the core. They had believed in a rational, ordered universe, but the plague was a reminder that some forces were beyond their control. This, of course, is a recurring theme throughout history, and you'll see it again and again. The historians still debate exactly what this plague was. Was it typhoid fever? Typhus, Ebola? The exact nature of the disease remains one of the great mysteries of the ancient world. They've even tried to test DNA from the burial sites, but the results are inconclusive. It seems like the true identity of the killer will be forever lost to the sands of time. You find yourself in a city that's a ghost of its former self. The bustling streets are now quiet, filled with the echoes of lost lives. You find that you've changed too. The constant presence of death has made you either numb or more compassionate. There seems to be no in-between. You find yourself watching your friends and neighbors with a grim fascination. Who will be next? Who will be spared? The feeling of powerlessness is absolute. And this is just the beginning of our journey. The ancient world was a place of astonishing beauty and creativity, but it was also a place of unimaginable suffering where a cough or a fever could change the course of an entire civilization. The Plague of Athens was a brutal and terrifying lesson in the fragility of life, and it set the stage for centuries of similar pandemics that would come and go. It was a stark reminder that even in the most enlightened of ages, the smallest and most invisible of foes could bring the greatest of empires to their knees. You leave the streets of Athens behind the distant smoke from the funeral pyres, a fading memory. The dust from the road you now walk feels different, more settled, more purposeful. We've fast-forwarded 270 years and the world has a different master. You now stand in the heart of the Roman Empire, a civilization that, by all accounts, has built a world more organized and interconnected than anything before it. It's the reign of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor. The year is 165 CE, and Rome is at the height of its power. Its legions control a vast network of roads, shipping lanes and cities stretching from Britannia to Mesopotamia. But this network, this magnificent web of commerce and conquest, is about to become a highway for something far more sinister than any army. A new plague has arrived, and it's about to make the one you just witnessed in Athens look like a simple cough. It starts as so many great calamities do, with a rumor. You are in a military camp on the eastern frontier, perhaps in a place like Seleucia on the Tigris. The air is thick with the scent of leather sweat and cheap wine. Soldiers clank about in their armor, their voices a low, rumbling murmur. The legion has just returned from a triumphant but grueling campaign against the Parthians. They've won a victory, a great victory, but they bring something back with them that no one can see. The first whispers are of a fever, one that starts with a violent, shuddering chill. Then come the boils, a rash of angry red pustules that spring up on the skin, a testament to the internal turmoil. The soldiers, tough as they are no match for it. A few die then, a few more, then a whole tent. The sickness spreads through the cramped, unsanitary barracks like wildfire. There's no escaping it. You can see the fear in the eyes of the centurions, the hardened veterans who have faced down countless barbarian hordes. But a sword or a shield is useless against this enemy. This is the Antonine Plague, and it will become one of the most devastating pandemics the Roman Empire ever faced. It's carried, you see, along the very arteries of Roman power. The returning legions, the celebrated conquerors, are the unwitting couriers. They march west, and with every mile they cover, the sickness spreads. One day a man falls ill in a village in Syria. A week later another falls ill in a market town in Anatolia. It's a slow, creeping horror, and it's unstoppable. The disease travels on the ships in the cargo hold, and on the feet of merchants and slaves. It's a silent passenger on the Pax Romana itself, the very peace and prosperity that Rome prided itself on. The efficiency of the Roman Empire, its legendary infrastructure, is suddenly a liability, a perfect machine for spreading death. You follow the plague's westward progress, a grim, ghostly shadow. You find yourself in a bustling port, maybe Ostia, the great port of Rome. The docks are usually alive with the clamor of 1,000 voices, the smell of exotic spices and fresh fish. But now there's an undercurrent of panic. A ship from the east has arrived, and word spreads that a sailor has fallen ill, a strange illness with a rash like none other. The city's doctors, men who believe in the balance of humors and the power of herbs, are baffled. They try their remedies, they offer their prayers to the gods, but nothing seems to work. The sickness laughs at their potions and their rituals. One man, a physician named Galen, actually escaped Rome for a time, seeking refuge in the countryside, a grim bit of reality that makes you wonder how much faith he truly had in his own medicine. The disease makes its grand entry into the city of Rome, and the world seems to grind to a halt. The Forum, once a place of lively debate and vibrant commerce, becomes a desolate, haunted space. You walk through the narrow streets, and the silence is deafening, broken only by the occasional mournful wail. The sheer number of the sick is overwhelming. The body count rises day by day. You can see the terror on people's faces, a kind of numb despair. This is a common historical fact. The plague was so severe it was said to have killed up to 2,000 people a day in Rome, alone at its peak. Can you even imagine that? Trying to live a normal life while 2,000 people are dying around you every single day? It's a level of grief and trauma that's almost beyond comprehension. The disease, as described by Galen himself, involved a high fever diarrhea, a cough, and a skin eruption that looked like an angry, pocked rash. This detail is crucial. The pustules would appear all over the body and often left permanent scars. Sound familiar? Historians still debate exactly what this plague was, but a leading theory is that it was a particularly virulent strain of smallpox. If so, it would be the first great smallpox epidemic of the Western world. Smallpox, that dreaded scourge of humanity, would stalk the planet for centuries to come, but this was perhaps its brutal debut on the world stage. The very idea of it, the thought that the skin you're living in could erupt into something so terrifying, is enough to make you shiver. As the plague grips the city, you see the social order begin to fray at the edges, a repeating pattern we've seen before, and will see again. The rich and the powerful, who might have thought themselves insulated from such a common man's disease, are struck down just as easily. Even the emperor's co-ruler Lucius Verus died from the plague, early on, a stark reminder that no one was safe. One of the more unusual details from this time is that the Romans, desperate for any form of divine intervention, adopted a number of foreign religious practices. The cult of the Egyptian goddess Isis, for example, gained immense popularity. People were looking for a god who seemed more potent, more able to intervene than their own traditional pantheon. It's a desperate hope, a frantic search for some kind of anchor in a world that has come unmoored. They believed that if they prayed to this new goddess, perhaps they would be spared. It's a sad and beautiful glimpse into the human psyche under extreme duress, the desire to believe in something, anything that will make the suffering stop. The plague's impact extended far beyond the city of Rome. The vast Roman military, stretched thin across the empire, was decimated. Entire legions lost a third or more of their men. This weakened the empire's borders, making them vulnerable to barbarian incursions. The plague became a contributing factor to the decline of Rome, a kind of opening act to the centuries of chaos that would follow. It's almost as if the gods of the old world decided to play a joke on Rome. You have conquered the known world. That's nice. Now let's see how you conquer a single tiny invisible foe. And the answer was not very well. It's a reminder that no matter how organized a society becomes, how grand its monuments, or how powerful its armies, it is always vulnerable to nature's cruelest whims. You can't help but be struck by the parallel between this and the plague in Athens. In both cases, the disease arrived during a time of war and national pride, and in both cases it brought the city and its systems to a breaking point. The sheer scale and speed of this one, however, are far greater, a testament to the fact that a more connected world is also a more vulnerable world. The death toll was staggering, estimated at up to 5 million people across the entire empire over the course of its run. That number is, of course, a guess, but it gives you a sense of the scale of the devastation. The plague burned itself out eventually, but the scars, both on the survivors' bodies and on the fabric of Roman society, would last for generations. The Roman world was forever changed by the invisible enemy that rode in with its own triumphant legions, a chilling echo of the fragility of even the greatest power. The story of the Antonine Plague is a somber chapter in the history of medicine. It was a disease that changed the course of an empire, a stark reminder that the greatest threats sometimes come from the tiniest things. The physicians of the time, with their rudimentary understanding of disease, were helpless. They tried to cure it with everything from bleeding the sick to burning foul-smelling herbs, but all their efforts were in vain. The sheer lack of understanding of what was happening to them must have been the most terrifying thing of all. This is where we leave the Antonine Plague, a ghost that haunts the greatest empire of its day. We leave the sprawling, chaotic world of the Roman Empire and the swift, brutal death of the Antonine Plague behind. The scene shifts. The fear we've explored so far has been one of sudden explosive terror, a fever that sweeps through a city and leaves a trail of bodies in its wake. But there is another kind of horror, a different sort of disease that haunts the ancient world. It is a slow, methodical torment, not of a swift death, but of a slow, agonizing social decay. This is the story of leprosy, a sickness that didn't just kill the body, but killed a person's life, their identity, and their very existence in the world of the living. It was, in a way, the living death. You are walking down a dusty road in a medieval European town, though the disease has existed for millennia before this. The air is cool and the sound of blacksmiths' hammers echoes from a nearby shop. You're on your way to the market and life seems to be bustling and normal. But as you round a corner, you hear a faint rhythmic clatter. It's the sound of a wooden clapper, a little noisemaker that people were forced to carry. The sound is a warning and it sends a jolt of ice through your veins. You immediately look to the side of the road, your eyes scanning the shadows. Everyone does. The sound means only one thing: a leper is near. You step back instinctively, holding your breath, as a figure emerges from the gloom. The person walking toward you is not what you might have pictured. They are not a skeleton wrapped in a shroud. They look mostly normal, but upon closer inspection, you notice the subtle signs. The skin on their face seems thickened. Their ears are slightly distorted and their eyebrows are gone. A feeling of dread washes over you. You see their hands are gloved, but you know what's underneath. Their face is a mask of sadness and isolation. Their eyes, though, are what truly get you. They are not the eyes of a monster, they are the eyes of a person who has lost everything. As they shuffle by, they lower their gaze, and the clapper in their hand makes that sound again, a hollow rattle that seems to say, "Don't come near, I am no longer a part of your world." The common historical fact about leprosy is the sheer degree of social ostracism that came with it. In many societies from ancient times through the Middle Ages, a diagnosis of leprosy meant you were officially cast out. You were legally dead to your family and your community. You had to wear a special uniform, a distinctive cloak or hat, and carry a noisemaker, a bell, or a clapper to warn people of your approach. The stigma was so powerful that it became part of legal and religious texts condemning the afflicted to a life on the fringes. Can you imagine that? To be told one day that you no longer exist, that you are legally and socially a ghost, and your only job is to announce your own non-existence wherever you go. It's a chilling thought, a sentence far more brutal than a quick death. The ancient world, with its lack of understanding of disease, saw leprosy as a punishment from the gods, a sign of grave sin. People believed it was a curse, a spiritual rot that manifested in the flesh. The unfortunate sufferers were seen not just as sick, but as morally unclean. You see this belief reflected in the bizarre and often cruel remedies of the time. Some people believed bathing in a special concoction of goat's milk and mud would cure it. Others thought that performing rituals or praying to specific deities would cleanse the body. Some even believed that bathing in a river or hot spring would wash the disease away. It's a desperate attempt to find a solution to a problem no one understands, and it's a testament to the fact that people will try anything to escape a fate so terrifying. It makes you feel incredibly grateful for a simple blood test and a few antibiotics. What makes this even more tragic is a little-known detail about leprosy, or Hansen's disease as it's now known. It's actually not that contagious. Seriously, it's caused by a bacteria, Mycobacterium leprae, and it requires prolonged intimate contact to spread. You can't get it from a casual touch or from walking past someone in the street. You are more likely to win the lottery than you are to get leprosy from a simple handshake. This means that for centuries, people were outcast and condemned to a life of misery for a disease that was incredibly difficult to catch in the first place. All that fear, all that ostracism, all that suffering was based on a misunderstanding of a microscopic organism. It's a tragic cosmic joke, a testament to the power of ignorance and fear. The lives of those with leprosy were defined by isolation. You couldn't sit with your family at a meal. You couldn't sleep in your own bed. You couldn't even stand with a crowd to listen to a speaker. You were forced to leave your home, your family, your friends, and live in a leprosarium, a colony for the afflicted. These places were often bleak and miserable with minimal resources and no hope of a cure. The inhabitants of these colonies were, in a sense, in a living purgatory waiting for the end. You can almost feel the profound loneliness that must have permeated these places, the quiet despair of people who had been stripped of everything that made them human. They were ghosts in their own time, forced to walk the earth and watch the world go on without them. The disease itself, in its advanced stages, was a cruel process. It affects the nerves, leading to a loss of sensation, particularly in the hands and feet. This is why you hear stories of people losing fingers and toes. It's not that the disease eats the flesh, but rather that the lack of sensation leads to repeated injury and infection. They can't feel pain, so they don't notice when they get a cut or burn, and the resulting infection can lead to the loss of a limb. It's a slow, horrible process. Imagine that your own body turning against you not with pain, but with a terrifying numb silence. It's a silence that slowly, inexorably takes away your ability to interact with the world. The long history of leprosy raises a fascinating and ongoing academic debate. Where did the disease come from? Did it originate in ancient Egypt and spread along trade routes? Or did it begin in the Indus River Valley and make its way west? The exact origins of Mycobacterium leprae remain a subject of intense scientific and historical inquiry. Genetic studies on ancient remains have given us some clues, but a definitive answer remains elusive. It's a reminder that even today, with all our technology, the secrets of the past are not so easily given up. The ghost of leprosy and its origins continues to haunt us. This is the grim reality of leprosy in the ancient world. It wasn't the kind of disease that brought a city to its knees in a matter of weeks, but it was a disease that slowly, agonizingly destroyed the lives of countless individuals over centuries. It was a disease of fear, of superstition, and of profound, soul-crushing loneliness. It teaches us a lesson that's perhaps even more terrifying than a fast-spreading plague, that sometimes the greatest sickness is not in the body but in the mind of the community, in its fear and its ignorance. The ringing of that bell, the sight of that lonely figure is a powerful reminder of how far we've come in understanding disease and how much we still have to learn about compassion. We leave behind the haunting silence of the leper colony and the quiet, slow dread that accompanied it. The sickness we now turn to is a completely different kind of monster. This one doesn't kill you with social isolation, it kills you with a violent, fiery brutality. It's a disease of scale, a force of nature so powerful it has shaped the course of human history, brought down empires, and rewritten the maps of continents. This is the story of smallpox, also known as the Great Pox, and it's a story that starts with a feeling of unease and ends with a complete transformation of the world as we know it. You are living in a crowded, bustling city, perhaps in ancient Rome, not long after the Antonine Plague we spoke of. The memory of that fever has just begun to fade, but you now hear of a new illness making its rounds. This time, it starts with a sense of profound exhaustion, a feeling of being completely drained of energy. Then comes the headache, a throbbing pressure behind your eyes that feels like a blacksmith is hammering on your skull. Soon after, a fever sets in a furnace that turns your skin to fire and makes your bones ache. You try to get out of bed, but your body refuses to cooperate. It's a flu, you think, maybe a bad fever, but you would be wrong. After a couple of days, as the fever rages, you look in a bronze mirror and see the first signs. Little red spots like angry little beads of sweat begin to appear on your face, particularly around your hairline. They quickly spread to your arms, your legs, your chest. Within a day or two, they turn into fluid-filled pustules, each one a testament to the viral war raging inside your body. They are round, they are firm, and they cover every inch of your skin. This is the hallmark of smallpox. This isn't just a rash. It's a field of angry, festering boils that are both a source of immense pain and a powerful symbol of the sickness. The pustules are everywhere, even in your mouth and your throat, making swallowing a painful ordeal. The very idea of it having your body covered in painful, oozing sores is enough to make you feel uncomfortable. For millennia, the disease would strike with merciless force, often killing a third of those it infected. Those who survived were not unscathed. The pustules, as they healed, would leave behind deep, pockmarked scars, a physical brand that marked them as survivors. The faces of countless historical figures, from pharaohs to emperors, were left forever disfigured by this terrible disease. The common historical fact is that this virus was one of the greatest killers in human history, wiping out entire populations that had no prior exposure to it. Its terrifying journey across the globe is a story of conquest, both human and viral. You find yourself standing on the deck of a Spanish galleon in the 16th century. The salt spray of the Atlantic mists your face. Below deck, in the cramped, humid confines, a sailor has come down with a fever. He's a new recruit, a young man who has never seen this kind of illness before. In his home village, a fever was just a fever, but this is different. It's the same progression: the headache, the burning fever, the telltale rash. The sailors, hardened and superstitious, recognize the signs and keep their distance. They know that this great pox can tear through a crew faster than a storm can sink a ship. And they know they are bringing it to a land that has never known it. The Americas, before the arrival of Europeans, were a world untouched by many of the diseases we've talked about. They had no resistance to these sicknesses. no genetic history of exposure. The immune systems of the indigenous people of the Americas were completely unprepared for the onslaught. The first wave of European explorers and settlers often unknowingly brought the virus with them. The result was a catastrophe of biblical proportions. Smallpox carried by a single person could rip through an entire village, wiping out 90% of the population in a matter of weeks. An entire empire could fall to a single infected blanket. It's a horrifying thought that a simple gift of cloth could be a death sentence. The narrative of this part of history of the European conquest of the Americas is often told through the lens of military might and technological superiority. But one of the most interesting and less talked about details is that smallpox was perhaps a more effective conqueror than any army. The virus didn't just kill people, it killed leaders, it broke down social structures, and it created a state of chaos and despair that made organized resistance all but impossible. The great civilizations of the Aztecs and the Incas, with their millions of people and advanced societies, were devastated by a microscopic killer. One of the more absurd cures from a different period involved a rooster. The idea was to hold the bird's backside against the face of the afflicted person. If the bird died, it was thought that the person would be cured as the disease had been transferred. It's a sad and desperate, but also kind of darkly funny example of how clueless people were about the true nature of this virus. The disease's origin is a topic of ongoing academic debate. Some historians believe it emerged in ancient Egypt, citing evidence from mummies found with a pockmarked appearance. Others believe it's a more recent virus emerging in the first few centuries BCE. The debate rages on, fueled by new genetic evidence and historical analysis. The virus's true beginning is a mystery, but its devastating impact is not. This is a commonality you'll see in our journey, humanity's constant struggle to understand the invisible enemies that plague us. And then, as a final twist of this long and terrible story, came the cure. Variolation. The early form of inoculation was a risky practice. It involved taking pus from an infected person's pustules and scratching it into the skin of a healthy person. The goal was to give them a mild case of the disease, thus granting them immunity. It was a gamble, as 1 in 50 people would die from the procedure, but it was a step toward understanding how immunity worked. This was a giant leap forward, a brave and desperate act of faith in science. And then in the late 1700s came the ultimate breakthrough. A country doctor named Edward Jenner noticed that milkmaids who had cowpox, a similar but much milder virus, didn't get smallpox. He took pus from a cowpox sore and inoculated a young boy. The boy got sick, but only mildly so. Then he inoculated the boy with smallpox and nothing happened. The boy was immune. This was the birth of the modern vaccine, and for the first time in human history, we had a weapon against this terrifying foe. Smallpox was a constant presence in the world for thousands of years, a terrifying and relentless killer. But thanks to science, a global campaign, and a few brave and brilliant individuals, we were able to eradicate it. The last known case of naturally occurring smallpox was in 1977. So as you lay in bed, you can rest easy knowing that the Great Pox, the disease that shaped history, is no longer a threat. It is one of the greatest triumphs of human history, a testament to what we can do when we work together against a common, invisible foe. We've explored plagues that swept across continents like an angry fire, and a disease that built a wall of social isolation around its victims. But now we turn to a different kind of horror, one that didn't arrive with a bang or a bell, but with a quiet, insidious cough. This disease was a slow thief in the night, a relentless and often romanticized killer that quietly consumed countless lives over centuries. It was known by many names: consumption, the White Plague, and the captain of all these men of death. This is the story of tuberculosis, a sickness that was as poetic as it was deadly, and in a twisted way often considered a mark of sensitivity or genius. You are living in a crowded city in the 19th century, maybe London or Paris. The Industrial Revolution is in full swing, and the air is thick with the smell of coal smoke and dampness. You feel a persistent tickle in your throat, a cough that you can't seem to shake. It's not violent or loud. It's just a low, persistent rattle, a small part of the background hum of the city. At first, you think nothing of it. It's just a cough after all. But over time, you notice other things. You're always tired even after a full night's sleep. You feel a strange low-grade fever that comes and goes, especially at night, leaving you drenched in sweat when you wake. You start to lose your appetite and your clothes hang more loosely on your frame. This is the slow, subtle beginning of what was once the most feared disease in the world. The sickness we now know as tuberculosis, caused by the bacterium Mycobacterium tuberculosis, was a silent and constant killer. Unlike the explosive plagues, it didn't arrive in a city and wipe out half the population in a year. It lived among people in crowded homes and workplaces in the damp air, and it picked off its victims one by one, quietly, relentlessly. This is a common historical fact. For centuries, TB was the leading cause of death in Europe and America. It was so common that people came to accept it as a normal part of life, a grim inevitability. It was everywhere, and no one was safe. What's particularly strange about this disease is that it wasn't just feared, it was also bizarrely romanticized. The physical symptoms of the disease, the flushed cheeks, the dilated pupils, the feverish glint in the eye, and the thin, ethereal frame, were considered by some to be beautiful. Poets and artists saw the disease as a kind of tragic muse. People like the composer Frédéric Chopin and the writer John Keats were ravaged by it, and their suffering was seen as a sign of their profound sensitivity, a poetic connection to a higher plane of existence. The idea that to be a genius you must suffer from a wasting disease is in retrospect a completely absurd and tragic concept. It's the kind of thing that makes you want to go back in time and hand them a box of tissues and a modern antibiotic. The doctors of the time with their limited knowledge were helpless against it. They would prescribe rest, fresh air, and a change of scenery. You hear stories of people traveling to sanitariums in the mountains, believing that the crisp, clean air alone would be enough to kill the disease. It's a beautiful thought, a kind of faith in nature's healing power, but it was of course completely ineffective. These sanitariums were often nothing more than beautiful prisons, places where the sick were sent to quietly fade away. The belief in fresh air was so strong that they would even have patients sleeping outside on balconies in the freezing cold, thinking the cold would somehow kill the bacteria. It's a tragic and beautiful kind of futility, a desperate attempt to cure the incurable. One of the most unusual details about the history of tuberculosis is its connection to the vampire myths of the 18th and 19th centuries. The disease would often run in families. A father would die, and a few months later a son would start to show the same symptoms: a slow wasting away, a pallid complexion, a racking cough. The family, with no scientific explanation for this, would believe that the dead father was a vampire coming back from the grave at night to feed on the blood of his relatives, sucking the life out of them. They would go to the grave, exhume the body, and perform rituals to kill the vampire, often by pulling out the heart and burning it. It's a terrifying and tragic side note, a grim look at how a lack of scientific understanding can lead to such profound and violent superstition. The disease was an absolute catastrophe, an endless tide of death that affected all classes, though the poor and crowded were as always hit the hardest. It was a disease that preyed on weakness, on malnutrition, on damp, unsanitary living conditions. It was a constant presence, a fact of life that you had to accept. It was so slow and insidious that people would often go for years without a proper diagnosis, spreading the disease to everyone around them, with every cough, every handshake. The feeling of being constantly on edge, of never knowing if your neighbor, your friend, or even your child had been quietly infected, must have been a profoundly unsettling way to live. The origin of Mycobacterium tuberculosis is a subject of fascinating academic debate. Did it jump from cattle to humans thousands of years ago? Or was it an ancient human disease, one that has been with us for as long as we have been living in settled communities? The truth is, we don't know for sure. What we do know is that it has been a constant presence in human history, a relentless killer that has haunted us from the days of ancient Egypt to the modern era. Even today, with all our medical advancements, it remains a serious global health problem, a testament to its tenacity. This is the quiet, horrifying legacy of tuberculosis. It wasn't just a physical disease, it was a societal one, a sickness that blurred the lines between life and death, between beauty and decay. It was a sickness that was everywhere, a fact of life that people came to accept. And perhaps that is the most terrifying thing of all, the slow, insidious nature of a horror that is so common, so accepted, that it becomes part of the very fabric of society. It was a reminder that the deadliest monsters are not always the ones that roar. Sometimes they are the ones that whisper. We've talked about diseases that arrived with a fiery roar, ones that consumed you slowly from within, and ones that marked you as an outcast. But the disease we turn to now is a different kind of horror altogether. It's a quiet enemy, one that hides in plain sight in the very thing you need to survive. It's a disease of the mundane, of the everyday. This is the story of typhoid fever, a sickness that has haunted humanity for millennia, turning a life-giving necessity into a poison. The horrifying truth of typhoid is that it was a disease of ignorance, a silent assassin in a glass of water. You were in a bustling, crowded, ancient city. It could be Rome or medieval Paris or any of 1,000 settlements where people live crammed together. And the concept of sanitation is either non-existent or profoundly misunderstood. The streets are a jumble of people, carts, and animals. The air is thick with the smells of sweatbread and something else. It's a low, unpleasant odor that hangs in the air, the scent of human and animal waste that's simply a part of the landscape. As you walk, you feel a deep, burning thirst. The sun is hot and you've been working all day. You come to a public well, a place where everyone in the neighborhood comes to get their water. You draw a bucket, the water is cool and clear, and you take a long, refreshing drink. It feels good, it tastes good, and it is about to change your life. A few days later, you feel it. It starts with a sudden, debilitating fever. It's not a slow onset, but a shock to your system. Your head begins to pound and your stomach cramps with a pain that makes you double over. The fever is so high that your mind begins to wander in a state of delirium. You have no idea where this came from. You didn't feel anything strange. You weren't near anyone who was sick. The disease, as described by ancient physicians, was a mystery. They had no way of knowing that the simple act of drinking water, a fundamental part of life, had just set a deadly clock ticking inside your body. This is the great, terrifying tragedy of typhoid fever. Its spread is a simple, horrible chain of events. One person infected with the Salmonella typhi bacterium uses a latrine or a field. Rain falls or a careless servant empties a bucket. The bacteria get into the ground, and from there into the ground, water, and from there into the very well from which you just drank. The people of the time had no concept of germs. They didn't understand that an invisible enemy could be lurking in the clear, cool water they relied on for survival. The most essential part of your day, the act of drinking water, was a kind of deadly gamble, and you never knew when your luck would run out. It's a quiet kind of horror, a subtle sabotage that feels far more unsettling than a visible rash or a sudden fever. One of the most profound and common historical facts is that typhoid fever and other waterborne diseases were the great deciders of military campaigns and sieges throughout history. An army could be 1,000 times stronger than its opponent, but if it camped near a contaminated water source, it would be crippled in a matter of weeks. During the American Civil War, more soldiers died from disease, much of it waterborne, than from combat. The mighty city of Troy, according to some accounts, was felled not by a horse, but by disease that crippled its defenders. The very act of living close to other people, which was the foundation of all civilization, was also a perfect breeding ground for these kinds of quiet killers. The disease itself, if left untreated, would cause a relentless fever, severe abdominal pain, and a telltale rash of flat, rosy spots. Your stomach would swell, and you would become so weak that you couldn't even sit up in bed. It was a miserable and often agonizing way to die, a slow poisoning of your internal organs. And the thing is, you could do nothing about it. You had no idea what was happening. You could pray to your gods, you could try to soothe the fever with herbs, you could plead for a miracle, but the poison was already in your system and it was too late. One of the more absurd remedies you hear about from this time is the belief that bathing the sick person in a very cold river would somehow shock the fever out of their body. In reality, it was just a final, desperate act of faith that likely did more harm than good. The true horror of a waterborne disease is best illustrated by a fascinating and unusual detail. It is the existence of the asymptomatic carrier. A person could have been infected with the bacterium, fought it off, and survived. They could be completely healthy and show no signs of sickness, but they would still be shedding the bacteria in their waste. They would be a walking, talking typhoid bomb, unknowingly contaminating everything they came into contact with. They were not sick, but they were deadly. This is a terrifying idea that a person who looks completely healthy could be a source of invisible death. The most famous example of this is the story of Typhoid Mary. In the early 20th century, a cook who infected dozens of people without ever showing symptoms herself. She was a tragic case, a person who was a victim and a villain at the same time, without ever knowing she was either. And it brings us full circle to our very first story. One of the most compelling academic debates about the ancient world is the identity of the Plague of Athens, which we began our journey with. While some historians still believe it was Ebola or typhus, a very strong case has been made that it was actually typhoid fever. The symptoms described by Thucydides, the fever, the sores, the delirium, match a particularly virulent strain of typhoid. It makes perfect sense that a disease of unsanitary, crowded living conditions would break out in a city packed with refugees behind its walls. It gives a whole new meaning to that terrifying story, turning a mysterious plague into an elegant, albeit horrific lesson in microbiology. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the simplest explanation is the most terrifying. So, as you lay here contemplating the horrors of the ancient world, think about that simple clear glass of water on your bedside table. 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, that simple drink could have been a death sentence. And in many parts of the world, it still is. The triumph of sanitation and clean water, the ability to turn this quiet killer into a harmless liquid, is a testament to human progress. It is a quiet victory over a very old and very terrifying foe. We've explored the silent assassin in the water and the quiet romantic killer of the city. But now we turn to a horror that is born not of an external germ, but of an internal emptiness. We're leaving the land behind with its crowded cities and its contaminated wells, and we're stepping onto a different kind of world, the cramped, swaying deck of a sailing ship. In the age of exploration, the greatest fear wasn't a monster of the deep or a storm at sea. It was a silent, creeping sickness that preyed on sailors and adventurers, a hidden foe that turned the human body into a decaying ship. This is the story of scurvy, the sailor's curse. You are a sailor on a long voyage in the 15th century. The air in the ship's hold is stale and smells of tar salt and damp wood. The days blur into weeks and the weeks into months. Your diet is a monotonous and unappetizing routine of salted pork, dried fish, and hardtack, a kind of rock-hard biscuit that can survive a hurricane. There are no fresh fruits or vegetables. You haven't seen a green leaf in what feels like an eternity. At first, you feel fine. You're strong, you're young, and the sea air feels good on your face. But after a few months, you notice a change. You feel tired all the time, a kind of deep, bone-weary fatigue that no amount of sleep can fix. Your limbs ache, and even the simple act of climbing the rigging feels like a monumental effort. You watch as other sailors begin to show the signs. They are pale, their faces are gaunt, and their eyes have a haunted, listless look to them. One day, you look at your gums in a small, polished piece of tin. They are swollen and spongy, and they bleed a little when you chew on your hardtack. You try to tell yourself it's nothing, just a minor irritation. But then you see a friend, a man you've shared 1,000 watches with, and his gums are so swollen that they are beginning to cover his teeth. His breath has a foul odor, and he can barely chew his food. You know with a sinking feeling what this is. This is scurvy. And you know with an even deeper fear that there is no escape. You are in the middle of the vast empty ocean, and there is no help coming. The common historical fact is that scurvy was the greatest killer of sailors on long voyages. The death toll from scurvy in the age of exploration was astronomical, far exceeding the number of deaths from storms, battles, or other diseases. On Vasco da Gama's voyage to India, 2/3 of his crew died from scurvy. On Ferdinand Magellan's famous circumnavigation, out of a crew of 237, only 18 returned, many of them having died from scurvy. Entire fleets could be wiped out by this hidden killer. It was a terrifying ordeal, a slow, agonizing descent into madness and death, a quiet massacre that took place in the silent vastness of the ocean. As the days turn into weeks, the disease progresses. The gums recede and bleed, and your teeth become loose. You can wiggle them with your finger. Old wounds that you thought were long healed reopen, a horrifying testament to the body's complete inability to repair itself. Your joints swell up, and you find it almost impossible to walk. You are in constant low-grade pain. The crew, once a boisterous, tight-knit group, becomes a collection of ghosts too weak to talk, too tired to even feel hope. The horror is in the slow, methodical way your body turns against you. It's a terrifying internal rot. One of the more absurd remedies that people tried was giving the sailors a dose of elixir of vitriol, which was basically sulfuric acid. The idea was that it would somehow purify their blood. In reality, it probably just gave them a stomachache on top of everything else. Bless their hearts for trying, though. For centuries, no one knew what caused scurvy. They had 100 different theories, but none of them were right. Some thought it was the sea air. Some thought it was a punishment from God. Some thought it was a kind of laziness. A fascinating and unusual detail is that dogs and other animals that were on the ships with the sailors did not get scurvy. This added to the mystery and confusion of the time, as the cause of the disease seemed to be something that only affected humans. They had no way of knowing that humans and a few other primates are among the only mammals on the planet that cannot produce their own vitamin C. The irony is staggering. The cure was always just a crate of fresh lemons or limes away. It was a brilliant Scottish naval surgeon named James Lind, who in 1747 conducted one of the first controlled clinical trials in history. He took a group of a dozen sailors with scurvy and divided them into different groups. He gave some cider, some vinegar, and some oranges and lemons. The group that ate the citrus fruits recovered almost immediately. The result was so obvious, so clear, that it's almost a kind of beautiful scientific poetry. It was a simple, elegant solution to a problem that had plagued humanity for centuries. But a compelling academic debate still exists around this. While Lind is often credited with discovering the cure, many historians argue that the knowledge was already there. As early as the 16th century, Dutch and English sailors had a working knowledge that citrus could prevent scurvy, but the knowledge was not formalized or spread. It was more like a secret trade secret passed from captain to captain. It wasn't until Lind's brilliant experiment that the knowledge was scientifically proven and a case could be made to implement it on a global scale. This is one of those great moments in history where the truth was always there, hiding in plain sight, but it took a leap of scientific imagination to really see it. This is the quiet, miserable horror of scurvy. It wasn't a monster in the dark, it was a ghost in the light. It wasn't a disease you could see coming with a rash or a cough. It was a slow, invisible decay, a relentless, quiet crumbling of the human body from the inside out. It was a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying enemies are not the ones that attack you from the outside, but the ones that are born from a simple lack, a simple absence, a void that consumes you until there is nothing left. It's a reminder of how vulnerable we are and how much we owe to the simple, humble orange. We've explored the silent void of scurvy, a sickness born from absence. But the disease we turn to now is born not of a lack, but of an abundance of stagnant water and humid, buzzing air. We're leaving the quiet horror of the sea behind and stepping into the suffocating world of the marsh. Here the greatest enemy isn't a starving body or a contaminated well. It's a tiny buzzing insect, a winged assassin, and its bite is a death sentence. This is the story of malaria, the fever of the marsh. A sickness so old it has been a constant presence in human history, shaping civilizations and bringing down mighty empires without a single sword or catapult. You are living in a hot, humid environment, maybe in ancient Rome, surrounded by the vast marshes of the Campania. The air is thick and still, and at night the silence is broken only by the chirping of crickets and the high, whining buzz of mosquitoes. You wave them away, a common annoyance that you've lived with your whole life. One of them lands on your arm and you slap it, leaving a small red welt. You think nothing of it. It's just a bug. But inside that tiny creature's body, a microscopic passenger has just boarded, and it is now swimming through your bloodstream, ready to wreak havoc. After a few weeks, you feel it. It starts with a feeling of being completely run down, a sense of malaise that you can't quite shake. Then the chills set in, a shaking so violent it makes your teeth chatter, and your whole body tremble. You pile on every blanket you own, but nothing can stop the feeling of profound cold. The chills last for an hour or so, and then, as if by a sudden change of a switch, a burning fever takes over. Your skin feels like it's on fire and you're drenched in sweat. Your head pounds, your joints ache, and your mind drifts in a state of delirium. Just as the fever reaches its peak, it begins to subside. You feel better, almost normal. You think you've beaten it, but you are wrong. The terrifying rhythm of malaria is its cyclical nature. Just as you begin to feel better, the chills and fever return right on schedule. The disease would cause these terrifying fevers to return every 2 or 3 days, leaving the person completely exhausted and delirious. You are trapped in an endless loop of sickness and false recovery. You cannot work, you cannot think, you can only endure the cycle. This is the common historical fact. Malaria, a constant presence in ancient Rome, was a major factor in the city's eventual decline. Its prevalence in the surrounding marshes was so great that it weakened the population, lowered birth rates, and crippled the Roman military. The mosquito, it turns out, was a more effective enemy than any barbarian horde. The people of the time had no idea how the disease was transmitted. They believed it was caused by bad air, or malaria in Italian, a poisonous vapor that rose from the swamps. They would try to avoid the marshes, but they had no way of knowing that the true source of the sickness was a tiny buzzing insect that could fly anywhere. It's a kind of absurd tragedy, isn't it? The solution to your problem was to swat the bugs, or better yet, avoid them entirely, but you had no way of knowing that. You were fighting the wrong enemy. You would try to cure it with everything from drinking foul-smelling swamp water to wearing amulets, but nothing worked. The modern remedy for a mosquito bite is a simple dab of a cream or lotion. But for them, it was the start of a journey that would likely end in a lonely death. The narrative of a malarial sickness is one of slow, relentless exhaustion. It's not a single violent event, but 1,000 small defeats. The disease would slowly drain you of all your strength, leaving you weak, anemic, and susceptible to every other infection that came your way. One of the more fascinating and unusual details about malaria is its relationship with the sickle cell trait. For people with the sickle cell gene, having one copy of the gene, a condition known as sickle cell trait, offers a surprising resistance to malaria. The deformed blood cells are not a good host for the malarial parasite. So in regions where malaria was rampant, a gene that caused a serious blood disorder was also in a strange, twisted way a key to survival. It's a beautiful and terrible example of human evolution, a desperate genetic gamble against a relentless foe. The origin of malaria is a subject of fascinating academic debate. Did it jump from animals to humans in Africa thousands of years ago? Did it evolve with us from an earlier form? The genetic evidence is complex and often confusing. And the exact moment and place that this tiny parasite decided to make its home in the human bloodstream remains a mystery. What we do know is that it has been a constant presence in human history, a relentless killer that has shaped our genes, our migrations, and the rise and fall of our civilizations. This is the quiet, terrifying legacy of malaria. It's a disease that doesn't just kill people, it cripples societies. It keeps people from working, from fighting, from living. It turns a beautiful green landscape into a source of constant threat. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest enemies are not the ones you can see, but the ones you can't. The terrifying buzz of a mosquito in the night, a sound that we now dismiss with a flick of the wrist, was once the opening note of a death march. It is a powerful reminder of how far we've come and how much we owe to the simple invention of a window screen. We've explored diseases that rode on the wind and water on the backs of fleas and mosquitoes, but the sickness we turn to now is a different kind of horror. It's a plague that spread not through the environment, but through the very fabric of human society, through intimacy and through the movement of armies and people. We're leaving the natural world behind and stepping into the age of man, a time of grand exploration and violent conflict. The sickness we're talking about is syphilis, and when it burst onto the European scene, it was a terrifying, unknown plague that would change the way people thought about disease morality and themselves. You are living in a Renaissance Europe, a time of art science and breathtaking change. The year is 1495, and you hear rumors from the south, from Italy, where a massive French army has just been besieging the city of Naples. The soldiers, they say, have been struck by a terrible new disease, one unlike anything anyone has ever seen. It's a sickness that is both gruesome and mysterious, and it's spreading like wildfire as the soldiers disperse back to their home countries. You think it's a rumor and exaggeration, but soon you hear of a case in your own city, and then another. The sickness is real, and it has a name: the French pox. Of course, if you were a French soldier, you would call it the Neapolitan disease. It's a kind of grim humor, the way every nation blamed the other for this terrible new plague. This is a common historical fact. The sudden and devastating appearance of this venereal disease in Europe in the late 15th century caused widespread terror and confusion. It was a completely new type of plague, one that spread through intimate contact, which made it a source of immense shame and social stigma. The disease was so terrifying and so new that it was initially believed to be a punishment from God, a literal mark of sin. This made it not only a physical torment, but a social one as well. At first, you don't think much of the disease. It starts innocently enough with a painless sore, a small ulcer that you might not even notice. Then after a few weeks, a strange rash appears all over your body. It's a kind of coppery, unsettling color, and it's often accompanied by a low fever and a feeling of general malaise. It feels like a bad case of the flu, something you could sleep off. But you can't. The rash and fever go away after a while, and you might think you're cured. But you are not. The disease has just gone into a quiet, insidious latency, a slow, silent stage that can last for years or even decades. This is the truly terrifying part of the illness. You feel healthy, you go about your life, you have a family, but inside you, the disease is quietly, methodically eating away at your bones, your brain, and your mind. The third stage of syphilis is a horror show of gradual, devastating decay. The disease attacks your vital organs, your bones, and your nervous system. You could lose your sight, your hearing, your balance. You could develop open sores, or your nose and palate could collapse. Your hair could fall out. You could lose your mind. It was a slow, agonizing descent into madness and physical decay. The horror of syphilis was not a quick, merciful death like some of the other plagues. It was a long, public, and humiliating decline, a slow-motion tragedy that everyone could see. One of the more unsettling and unusual details of the history of syphilis is the cure that was often worse than the disease itself. For centuries, the go-to treatment for syphilis was mercury. It was believed that the mercury would kill the disease inside the body, and it was administered in every way imaginable a person would drink it, rub it on their skin, and even inhale its vapors. The treatment would cause you to drool uncontrollably, lose your hair and teeth, and it often led to a slow, agonizing death from mercury poisoning. There was a popular saying at the time, "A night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury." It's a kind of grim, dark joke about the horrific choice between an agonizing disease and a deadly cure. The origin of syphilis is a subject of fascinating academic debate. One theory, known as the Columbian theory, is that Christopher Columbus's crew brought the disease back from the New World, where it had been a mild, non-venereal disease for centuries. It then mutated in Europe and became the terrible plague that it was. This is a very popular theory because the disease seemed to appear suddenly in Europe right after Columbus's return. But there is another theory, the pre-Columbian theory, which states that syphilis had been in Europe all along, but it had been a milder disease and had been misdiagnosed. It was only during the late 15th century, with the crowded and unsanitary conditions of the French army, that it mutated into a more virulent and terrible form. The debate rages on, fueled by new genetic evidence from ancient skeletons and new historical analysis. This is the grim legacy of syphilis. It was a disease that changed the very landscape of human health and social interaction. It was a disease of both the body and the mind, a sickness that not only destroyed your physical self, but also your reputation and your place in society. It was a terrifying reminder that even in the most beautiful and enlightened of ages, a single act of intimacy could be a death sentence, a mark that would follow you to the grave. It was a disease of shame, of secrecy, and of slow, agonizing decay. It was a new kind of horror, and it was a grim warning of the dangers that lurk in the most intimate parts of our lives.